Thanks for coming. Oh, this is weird. I can hear my own voice. Okay. Have you ever forgotten that you're married? Bing, bing. Not very relatable then. What about your lunch? Have you ever made yourself lunch at home and left it in the fridge and gone to work? There we go. That's a bit more relatable. So my name's Trudy Ward, and today I'm going to explain to you why there's very little difference between forgetting your husband and forgetting your lunch. It's not because you're not hungry, and it's not because you don't love him, but they're not as different as it sounds. I forgot to pick the thing up. There we go. So what is neuroinclusion? I stole this quote. If it's yours, I apologise, but I can't find the source. But it sums up what neuroinclusion is. It's the cohabitation of neurodiversity. My husband and I are both neurodiverse. He also knows that when I'm fed, the chaos that pervades my every waking moment is somewhat calmer. Even though he knows that for me, food is boring. I never feel hungry, and unless it's right in front of me, I will consistently forget to eat. Out of sight is out of mind is a real thing. It's called object permanence, and it doesn't just apply to objects. I work away a lot. I also lock myself in rooms to escape or create or just plain hide. And because I'm focusing on other things, I often forget that my husband exists until he brings me some food. Because he knows that I'll forget him for longer unless I eat. So what he started to do, and why this talk is called Keys in the Fridge, is he started making me lunch, so I wouldn't forget him during the day, possibly. But I would always forget to take my lunch to work. So he's ever the problem solver. He took my car keys off me, put my car keys on top of my lunchbox in the fridge. This picture is from my fridge. Can't tell you how glad I was that day that I took that picture that the fridge was clean. But this is neuroinclusion. This is working together to set each other up for success. He does that for me, and I do that for him in ways that he's asked me not to share with you. It's collaboration, acceptance, care, and patience that we all need to cohabit in this world and contribute to it in a meaningful and fulfilling way. So why is it important? I mean, it probably sounds quite obvious from what I've said so far. Making sure people eat is, kind of essential, really. But I think it's important because I think it's time that we stop talking about neurodiversity. I think we've reached the point with neurodiversity now where awareness is growing. Some people have diagnoses, some are self-diagnosed, some are curious about how their brains work. And that's where neuroinclusion comes in, because it's less focused on those labels that some of us really struggle to get. I'm 42, I'm female. I cannot get a diagnosis on the NHS because I don't fit their boxes. But every screening test I've done, every conversation I've had with a psychologist, they give me another label. I've got a nice collection growing. I'll tell you all about them if you're interested. But my husband doesn't support me because I have ADHD or because I'm autistic. He does it because he cares and he wants to see me succeed. Brains are really interesting because they're just a grey, squishy mass that we carry around in our heads. And that's as far as they go in terms of similarities. How they develop, how they change as you grow up and you go through life, you learn more stuff, you have some trauma, you experience some things. Your brain changes every single day. Your brains are changing now. I think that's really cool. But it doesn't make one brain less than another brain. It doesn't make any brain typical other than in that grey, squishy mess that we carry in our skulls. Neurodivergence is innate. I'm not here to say that everyone has got autism or has got ADHD. I'm not invalidating anybody's diagnoses because they are so crucial to understanding ourselves in some contexts. They're not available to everyone. Having a diagnosis when you talk about neurodivergence is a privilege and a powerful one. But it's not possible for the human race to not be neurodivergent. We can't be all the same. We can't think all the same. Society would love us to. It'd make life so much easier if we all just followed the same thing. The election today, we'd all just follow the same way and just, get on with it and just carry on. But that's not how we work. That's why we have discourse. That's why we change things. The word neurodiversity was developed in the 70s, I think, to promote neurotypes that were in a minority. And it worked really well up until recently. And I think this is correlated with lockdown. The more of us that understood more about neurodiversity when the world stopped and allowed us to think about that thing, the more awareness grew. The more we saw our children struggle in different circumstances, the more we saw our work colleagues struggle in different circumstances or thrive in different work circumstances. Why were some people doing so well and some people weren't? Because neurodivergence is innate. We are all different. Excuse me a sec, I will drink a lot of water. I'm not going to go into the medical stuff very much, but our brains are part of our nervous systems. We all have them. If we didn't, we wouldn't be awake, we wouldn't be walking, we wouldn't be thinking, we wouldn't be drinking, we wouldn't be doing anything. And our nervous systems are incredibly clever systems. They know how to keep us safe. And at this point, I'd like to tell you a story about why neuroinclusion is so important to me. Lockdown saved my life. Genuinely, I don't think I'd be here unless the world had stopped in the way that it did, at the time that it did. I'd lived with chronic pain for 10 years. I'd been told that my pain was incurable and that my quality of life was entirely dependent on the cocktail of extremely scary drugs that the doctors had prescribed for me. And I was told to enjoy the small glimmers that I could get in life and live with it. I was 36 when I got that news. I had a 6-year-old. That wasn't okay with me. But that's what I was told. I started to process this. I started to grieve the life that I was losing. And then lockdown hit out of nowhere. That was cool. Not. But I couldn't get my prescription. So I started to panic. What do? I haven't got my drugs. When's the pain going to hit? When am I going to get worse? When am I going to spiral? So I spaced out my medication. I took them slower to hopefully get me through this. And the pain didn't come. And then I ran out of medication. And the pain still didn't come. It wasn't there. Because my nervous system and my body, my brain, was finally listening to the threat that it had been under for decades up until that point. My entire life had been building up to the culmination of chronic pain, to incurable pain that went away when the world stopped. And that's how lockdown saved my life. When my brain, my body started cohabiting, started working together, not to try and highlight the danger that my brain thought I was in anymore, but to maintain the healthy status quo that we'd reached, that stopping had allowed me to regain, my regulated nervous system. I haven't had any pain for 4 years, and that's quite astonishing, actually. I'm still getting used to that. But after decades and decades of learning that my brain, of forcing my brain to do things that it wasn't geared up to do, I started learning instead what was making it happy and what generated good feelings instead of the negative ones, and instead of perpetuating those loops. Now, there's two major models of disability of sort of theory of how it impacts people in their lives. Now, the medical model of neurodivergence is a very pathological model. But through all of the treatments I had as I was in pain, and I had multiple surgeries, I'm talking probably 10 surgeries to try and figure out what this pain was, all in my head. Because the pain was in my head, you know. That was the other thing the doctor said. I'd forgotten that until that very moment. And so many MRI scans that I can now fall asleep quite contentedly in an MRI machine. I find it really soothing. Not a single doctor mentioned the fact that my nervous system could be causing my pain, that being burned out from neurodivergent burnout, from overwhelm, could be causing pain. It's an emerging field of research. There's stuff coming out all the time about it now, but I'm going back 10 years. Nobody knew. Nobody knew. Or if they did know, they weren't talking about it. But the over-pathologization, that's hard to say, of neurodivergence means that when you get a diagnosis or you join enough dots and you figure out that for yourself that you have some neurodivergent needs, you're all of a sudden broken. The system views you as incomplete or something to fix. They throw medicine at you, or they throw CBT at you. If you're lucky, you're not guaranteed to get any help. I'm really interested, if anybody is interested, if anybody's open, there's no pressure whatsoever. But if you have a diagnosis, did your world change the day after? Was it the validation that made the difference? No? Did you get extra support?
No. I thought everybody's brain was like that. So I was suddenly shocked and realised that actually that burnout was something I was experiencing. Just one coping mechanism.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing. So once you get your diagnosis or you figure it out for yourself, you get these labels of dysfunction. And years of trying to integrate into a world that wasn't made for you, you now get a load of guilt. They throw some guilt at you because you still don't fit. You've got your label, go away. You've got your explanation for why things are difficult for you, off you go and figure it out. Especially if you're an adult. There isn't any real support. So the cycle perpetuates of guilt, moving into fitting in, moving into more burnout. And then you discover the social model of disability, which is really, really key, actually, to understanding how disability and society actually integrate. It's a really accurate model because it talks about how your environment disables you, not your disability, how society is geared up to influence you in a negative way. But it's also flawed. It focuses on lack. It focuses on deficit. It's still using the premise that there's such a thing as normal. I don't believe there is such a thing as normal. What if there's another way? So why am I talking about neuroinclusion? So like I said at the top of the talk, I don't have a formal diagnosis. I am way too old and way too female to achieve that on the NHS. I also don't want to pay £3,000 for a piece of paper that tells me what I've already learned about myself. I paid a fortune for an undergraduate degree 10 years ago because somebody told me I ought to, but it didn't make me any better at my job. It just left me in masses of debt. That's unhelpful. But what understanding neurodiversity gave me, or my own neurodiversity, was a framework for all the things that have happened to me in my life and helped me understand those. It's that validation piece I mentioned a moment ago. Because I was expelled when I was 12 and told I wouldn't amount to anything. I was disciplined in a data entry job because I was outperforming the rest of the team. My mum was called a liar in a doctor's waiting room for having a conversation with me when I was 18 months old. The receptionist was convinced that mum was talking to herself and would not accept that she was speaking to an 18-month-old child. And I've got friends in the audience, they'll know how flaky I am. So maintaining friendships has always been a tricky one. But through understanding me better and building a lot of knowledge and working with neurodivergent individuals and talking to people and being open about it and embracing everything about myself, that's why I'm here today. I'm advocating for neuroinclusion as an alternative way of managing, awful word, neurodiversity. It's about supporting everyone in every single context. And as for amounting to nothing, I'm proud to announce and commit on this stage that my PhD will be submitted by Christmas. Because, as I said, I believe there's another way. And for me, it's linked to psychological safety. And this is the sage advice bit of the talk. This is the wisdom. So fitting in isn't safe. We're taught at school that fitting in is the safest thing that we can do. Don't stand out. Don't be unusual. Fitting in is dangerous. Standing out is dangerous. So we learn to mask our individuality. We emulate behaviours that aren't ours. We pick up language that we don't even say because that's what everyone else is saying. But it doesn't equate to safety for our nervous systems because our nervous systems know who we are, the real us, the real me, the real you. Fitting in is the only guaranteed way to lose contact with yourself. And it's a pretty much guaranteed route to burnout and pain. Our nervous systems, as I said earlier, are really clever, but they're also agile in every meaning of the word. They react and they adapt and they iterate. If we aren't paying attention to what our nervous system is telling us, then it will try harder to get your attention. If your sleep pattern is poor for long enough, but you don't do anything about that, your nervous system will send you a migraine and say, oi, stop. And if you don't pay attention to the migraine, it will send you some back pain. And if you don't pay attention to the back pain, it will send you a sore throat. If you don't pay attention to the sore throat, it will send you something else. And it will keep going and it will ramp it up until you end up in chronic pain and on a cocktail of drugs that I can't even explain to you if I wanted to. I remember having a ketamine infusion and thinking, I'm not a horse. But, that's how serious this stuff gets. But that's called dysregulation. So when your nervous system is sending you all these repeated signals and boom, 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 please pay attention, please stop, please do this, please change something about your environment, that's dysregulation. That is when your brain and your body are not working together. But used wisely, dysregulation is information. You can learn from it. If you pay attention to when your body and your brain aren't feeling right, you can do something about it. Today, Agile on the Beach is my favourite conference. I never miss it unless I have COVID, which was the only time I've missed it. And I love it for so many reasons that I don't need to talk about right now. But I haven't been to any talks today. I went to a workshop and sat quietly because I was overwhelmed, because I knew I was doing this. I wanted to prepare, I wanted to be my best self for this talk. So I've hidden in the green room. Thanks, guys. But that was me listening to what my body needed so I could be here and be the best me right now. And actually, I've been terrified about this all week, and I'm loving it, so yay! What dysregulation does is remove our ability to make choices about how we want to react to a situation. When we are dysregulated and when it's at its worst and we're entering into meltdown, we have no control over that. It's uncontrollable, it's spontaneous sometimes. All it takes is one more thing. Could be a fire alarm going off or someone having an irritating ringtone. But that's all you need to tip over into a meltdown. But if you're listening and you're paying attention and you're learning from your dysregulation, you can regain your regulated state. Because all being regulated means is that we have the ability to choose our reaction in the moment. Whether that's removing ourselves and hiding in the green room for the day, or whether it's putting our noise-cancelling headphones on in the office and trying something different. It's the ability to make choices that work for us. So I have a theory. It's unverified, except anecdotally, I suppose, about building trust and building psychological safety. And I believe that it requires somebody to go first, especially in systems or in teams or in organisations where you are in a low safety environment to start with. Somebody has to go first. I don't know if any psychological safety researchers would agree with me on that, because it's just a theory and just something that I've noticed. But I've been testing it in my new role, and I've been going first. I've been stepping into teams with low safety. You can see it a mile off because they don't ask why, they just follow the process. They don't think about why they're doing it. They're invested in doing the best that they can, but following things in the way that they know is safe. So I've been going first in those spaces. I've been sharing what works and what doesn't. And it's actually going really well. I'm seeing people come forward and actually want to talk to me. They want to do more work with me because they trust me, because I've been honest, because I've been vulnerable and honest. And it takes a lot of courage to be that vulnerable, to be the one that goes first. And I'm certainly not suggesting that you all go out there tomorrow or Monday and go first unless you are in that really, really regulated position. Your nervous system has to be solid if you are going to try and be vulnerable in an honest and authentic way. But being vulnerable, as I said, takes courage, but it soon becomes a habit. It's difficult not to do. When I checked in yesterday and the lady handed me a map, the panic that struck me, I can't read a map. My God, that's the scariest thing. I said, please just point me in the right direction. She was lovely. She just accepted it. It's just how I was different and how I needed something. But I can't help it now. It's just who I am. But performative vulnerability doesn't work. You have to be honest with it. You cannot fake it until you make it with vulnerability if you want it to be effective. The power of vulnerability is in its authenticity and honesty. Have any of you ever said to a client, to a boss, to someone that has influence over you that you want to impress, I don't know, when they've asked you a question? Can you remember how it felt the first time you did that? Bit of terror? How did it feel the second time? Yeah? You soon get used to being that brave. You've just got to do it once. And it really does make a difference. And this is why I think someone has to go first, because someone has to demonstrate what is possible. So if you take the time to heal and nurture your own nervous system and get you into a place where you can support those around you to do the same, you're not going to heal other people, because healed people don't heal people. They create the conditions that people need to heal, because they understand what the space needs to look like. And that, for me, is, as leaders, is what we need to be aiming for. Just as in an Agile team, the lead role isn't to direct. It's not to point things, instruct. It's to create those conditions for the team to contribute effectively and collaboratively. This is just the internal work that you need in order to make that effective on a larger scale. The cognitive diversity that can emerge from using this at a team level, though, is really, really powerful. Because the diversity of thought that we know we need for innovation, for problem solving, just for general positivity, needs to come from somewhere, and it doesn't come from nowhere. You have to create the space for it to emerge. Some people need the common goal, they need the project, they need the task list, they need to know where they're going, and they derive their purpose and their safety from that. Others, they need the human connection first. I wonder why those things are kept separate. I wonder why we have human in the pool room and work in the office. It doesn't make sense to me. Why aren't we doing those things all at the same time? Because building that collective understanding and that safety around knowing that we all think differently, if there's any cognitive dissonance, oh, sorry, I didn't know it did that. Learn something every day. There we go. If there's any cognitive dissonance existing in the team, it will come out. You'll know about it. So you'll be able to do something with it. And you can do something positive with cognitive dissonance. It doesn't all have to be about correcting things. It can be it's just another way of looking at things. It's joining the dots when somebody doesn't understand something. Right, so that's the lecture bit over. Oh, this has crashed now. Oh, wonderful. I love tech. There we go. So, stereotypes and shifting narratives when it comes to how we think about how we think, frankly, is what I'm getting at here. We need to address it from multiple directions. It's not all about healing our nervous systems. That's just one really important, really key part of how we improve neurodiversity and neuroinclusion in the workplace, but in society generally. We can't overlook the fact that we do live in a society that isn't geared towards neuroinclusion right now. It isn't geared towards any models of collaborative care and support unless we do it ourselves in our teams, in our organisations. The idea of bringing your whole self to work is still very much rooted in what can we get out of you? What are you going to give us? And we need to widen this view. It's not just about generating revenue. To increase productivity, we need to stop ignoring that we're human. I've worked in HR for over 20 years, and for over 20 years, every time I say the phrase human resources, I get the ick. Ugh. I even don't like the trend that we're in at the moment of moving towards people professionals, because that's not authentic either. The profession just hasn't caught up yet. We're not there in terms of understanding how best to close the gap between the human and the resource needs. But that's a whole different talk. For today, we're going to challenge some neurodiversity stereotypes, and I'm really sorry about this one, but it's not a superpower. Believe me, I'd love it to be, but it is more like kryptonite. The superpower narrative is my least favourite of the neurodiversity paradigms that you'll come across, because I believe it is dehumanising and it ignores everything about being neurodiverse and zeroes in on what we can get and what we can take from the neurodiverse community, what we can be used for. Yeah, do you know what? My pattern recognition skills are off the charts, but I can't tell the time. I don't know how long I've been talking or how much longer I've got to go. I don't know if I've got enough content to fill 45 minutes. I've no idea. You tell me which you'd rather have. Pattern recognition skills or the ability to tell the time? It's a trade-off. We all have them. This one is hard to refute because it's true. Some autistic people have no empathy. Some neurotypical people have no empathy. Frankly, I'd argue that more neurotypical people have no empathy. But again, different talk. A lot of autistic or neurodiverse people experience something called alexithymia. And I'm never sure whether I'm saying that right, so if there are any specialists in the room, please correct me. Alexithymia is a difficulty in understanding and expressing your own emotional state. So if you don't understand your own emotions and you can't figure out what's going on in your own body and in your own head, how are you going to infer what somebody else has got going on? Especially when you also have communication differences from a neurotypical. You may have different social skills from a neurotypical, if indeed there's such a thing. How are you going to display empathy in a way that that person is going to understand it? It's short-sighted, but it all does appear because it doesn't, to show no empathy, because it doesn't fit what we expect. Now, this is something that I'm asked by managers all the time, working with neurodiverse people. And for me, there are two answers. The first one is, how are you giving that feedback? Examine your own feedback structures. Is it timely? Is it genuine? Is it aligned to a clear and outlined expectation that you set at the outset and you know that your neurodivergent colleague understood the rules before they started work? If not, there's a problem with your feedback structure. It's not the neurodiverse person's fault. There is, however, something that we need to talk about when it comes to feedback, and that something is called rejection sensitivity dysphoria, or rejection sensitive dysphoria. It's something that is something of a phenomenon. We don't know why neurodiverse people tend to experience this. I see a lot of neurotypical people experience something similar. But rejection sensitivity is when you fail at something or when you are given some harsh feedback, it physically hurts inside. It crushes you. Your spirit literally leaves your body and fucks off because it's had enough of the difficult feelings that you are generating for it. In Agile, we need to fail fast, right? We need the safety of fast failure. If you're experiencing rejection sensitivity and you're in a culture that wants you to fail fast, how do you reconcile those two things? Well, if Agile is done well, if your goals are set clearly, if you have clear lines of accountability and a supportive team, then that feedback, that failing fast becomes easier to do. You learn how to do it. But if you are lacking accountability and you are lacking trust in your leadership or your feedback structures, then that's going to get worse and you're going to disengage your rejection-sensitive people. Rejection sensitivity is also why some people won't speak up in team meetings, because they're scared that they're going to sound stupid. All back to psychological safety. So why are they wincing? Most of us don't actually wince outwardly very much. It's more of an inward wince, but you can generally see that we do it because we tend to jump backwards or squirm or something. But this is all about sensory processing. On the way down here this morning, I was listening to Richard Hammond's podcast, of all things, and he had an autistic author on there called Pete Warmby. If you've not listened to him or followed him on Instagram, I recommend you follow him. He's a really interesting guy. And he was saying that when you're diagnosed with autism or you figure out that you have autism, you're gifted a mixing desk with all the different levers to set your levels. And some levels are really low, some levels are really high. And it's different for every single autistic person. The point is that we do all have mixing desks, right? Wherever we are on the spectrum, whether we're typical or not, it's just the mixing desk is different. When you're autistic, you've got the super mix 4000. When you're neurotypical, you've got the boring mix 2. Sorry. Love you, really. But the point is that I'm wearing this headset, the lovely chap at the back put this on for me, and I am so conscious that I'm wearing this microphone. I'm amazed I can actually speak, because it's like, oh my God, the sensory. It's on my head, which is a really sore point for me, but I'm quite proud of myself. I'm doing all right. But I have comfortable shoes on, which is making things so much better. It's quiet. The only thing I can hear is my own voice and the electricity making the lights work. So my levels are moderated. If you're outside at lunchtime in the queues, in the heat, all the smells, all the people, nobody knowing where they're going, lots of people asking where they're at, what you're doing, everyone's wearing different clothes, everyone's talking, where are you from? I don't recognise you, wow, sensory overload. That's why they're wincing. Because too much, imagine if a fire alarm had gone off while you're outside in all that noise. You may have there might have been a person out there who was so overwhelmed by it all that would tip them into meltdown. Meltdown doesn't necessarily look like throwing yourself on the floor and having a toddler fit. It can be dissociation. You just back off quietly and you zone out because you just can't take anymore. Your brain shuts off. And for what it's worth, a lot of late discovered adults use dissociation as their way of melting down because we were taught not to do it openly, because we were a hassle to other people when we did it openly. So this one's a favourite of mine. Why won't they just do the thing? Oh, there's lots of reasons for that. But for this specific talk, I'm going to zero in on something that the medics have called pathological demand avoidance. I love that one. I'm demand avoidant. It's great. When somebody said, can you make a slide deck? Chloe, can you help? And this is where incredible colleagues come in to do this thing. My husband said to me the other day, it's raining outside, you should wear a coat. Did I wear a coat? But what he has learned is that if he says, Trudy, do you want the blue coat or the yellow coat? I will take a coat. Probably won't be the blue or the yellow one, but, that's not the point. He's given me what I'm craving. He's giving me the autonomy to make a choice. And that is a better name for pathological demand avoidance. Pathological demand avoidance is so called because that's what it looks like to you when I refuse to do the thing that you're asking me to do. To me, it feels like a cry for autonomy, a pathological demand for autonomy. That's all I want, just want the choice. So when you're in a team and you're trying to get someone to do the thing, give them some choice over how, when, where. It'll help, I promise. And this one, I've saved the best for last because it's my favourite. Executive dysfunction is great. It's the bit of your brain at the front that helps you to do stuff. And in many neurodiverse people, it just doesn't work. But one of the major things it does is help with consistency. But when you're overwhelmed with everything else that I've just talked about, when you've got demands coming out of your ears and you're feeling guilty because they said should and you now can't do the thing, or they offered to help you, God, that's even worse, and you can't do the thing. Or when you've been at a noisy conference for 2 days and you're exhausted and all you need is just some time to process all that information. Your executive function lowers. And that's not peculiar to neurodiverse people. We all have executive function, and we all will suffer from reduced executive function when we're tired or when we're hungry or when we're overwhelmed. The reason why this one is my favourite is that I can actually give an Agile example of where this is a problem. Retrospectives are really difficult when you struggle with executive function, because one of the other things it does is help you remember stuff. So if you're only holding a retrospective once every 2 weeks, and you want your neurodiverse colleagues to give you some meaningful feedback on what they've been doing over the last sprint, what they've experienced over the last sprint, they're either going to spend the last 3 days of the sprint before the retrospective trying to remember all the things. They'll be going back through their JIRA tickets, desperately trying to go, oh, what did I do? I know I had that thought. Where was that? Because they won't think to write it down while they're in the process of. If you put them in a room, put them on the spot and ask them to do a retrospective, you can't do it. You can't contribute. Not in a meaningful way. I think there's ways around it. My good friend over here had a thought for Agile on the Beach is back, called continuous retrospectives, which was having a whiteboard. It was pre-lockdown, obviously, so it must have been 5 Agile on the Beaches ago, which was having a whiteboard in the office for a continuous retrospective, and every time something happened, you put a post-it note. They only had one meeting, but the post-it notes went on the board throughout the sprint. Just made it so much easier for everyone to contribute because they were in the moment. They didn't have to recall what they were doing or what was happening at that moment. And I do have one last story about why this is my favourite thing, because I was denied a promotion on the basis that there are 2 Trudys that people experience. Now, I can identify with this because I experienced 2 Trudys as well. There is high-performing, fabulous, knock-your-socks-off Trudy, and she is fucking incredible. Everyone wants one of those on your team. She will just do whatever you ask her to do. She'll do it really bloody well, and you will never be let down. And then you have disengaged Trudy, who just doesn't care. She's not disengaged, she's dysregulated, she's tired, she's exhausted, because being this Trudy is really bloody hard work. And when you're ADHD, your balance goes like that. Your ability to regulate your behaviour and be consistent is just not there. You're either brilliant or you're shit. And my employer only wanted the brilliant Trudy. Believe me, I only want the brilliant Trudy because it's hard work writing a PhD when you go into disengaged, dysregulated Trudy every 10 minutes. That's hard work. I know this weekend's going to be a write-off, but I'm ready for it because I know it's coming because I've learned from my nervous system. But things get in the way. And when you build understanding, starting with yourself and then looking out at the rest of your teams, and the rest of the people around you. This isn't just about your teams, this is about your personal life as well. This is about everyone that you come into contact with. That grumpy shop assistant, you don't know what they've had to deal with. I know the whole #BeKind thing, but what if they've had the worst day ever? What if the customer before you, yelled at them? They may have been really high performing until that person yelled at them, and now they're dysregulated and just want to dissociate. It matters. Neuroinclusion matters. Thank you.